I say that with all pride because I mean it. So anyway, hi there. How are you?
Hi, Ron. How are you?
Good. Kim is here with our brown bag lunch, and she has brought a special guest today that is going to have a walk back in time with us today. We talked about it last time we were together, and today we get to actually enjoy it. As my dear friend and, as far as I'm concerned, the spiritual leader of our community, Father Patrick Beretta, is here with us today. So, Father, welcome.
A pleasure to be here, always.
Well, first, Kim, ladies first, would you please introduce yourself for the brown bag lunchers out there?
Well, hello. My name is Kim Kahn, and as most of you probably know, I work up at the Butte Archives. I've been there for 9 years, I think, and I facilitate the brown bag lunch, which we prefer to have in person, but because of the strange times we're living in, we are doing them here on the radio instead with no pictures.
Well, yes, there
Which
are
is
pictures.
easier. This
is radio. If you close your eyes, we will paint you a word picture. Because the mind, by the way, is much better at filming and replaying than the screen. Yes. So we get to let you close your eyes and take you on a journey.
Yes.
How's that?
And Father Beretta is going to take us on an excellent, really, a journey, literally a journey
A
today.
journey back in time. Well, first, Father, would you please tell everybody a little bit about yourself and a little bit about you growing up?
Well, Patrick Beretta. I'm a parish priest in Butte, and I've been in Butte for 8 years now and grew up in Europe.
I can't believe it's been 8 years.
8 years, yeah.
Wow.
8 years. Grew up in Europe, lived a large chunk of my adult life in Southern California, and I'm here now. This is home, and I'm really blessed by this community and people like you and Kim, and this community in general has been a wonderful blessing to me.
Well, it goes both ways because you've definitely blessed this community with a lot of your thoughts and your dreams and your willingness to step up and lead in the community. So thank you. I have to tell you this yesterday, and I'm going to do this and then we'll get to the show, but yesterday I met with who I felt was one of those spiritual leaders in our community, one of those people that has gone beyond the vocations and has stepped up as a community leader as well, Sister Mary Jo McDonald.
Oh, absolutely.
And I put the two of you in that same area where you've lived your vows, you've lived your desire to worship and to bring others to God, but at the same time willing to step up in the community and make the community a better place to live. So thank you to both of you.
She does that very, very well.
Well, and you do as well. So I wanted to point that out. And today we are going to have a journey back in time because last time you were here, you talked a little bit about you're kind of a history buff.
Yeah, I have a lot of interest in local history, and since I came to Butte, I fell in love with Butte history. And in the past year and a half, I have paid really close attention to the role of women in history, because history has tended to be written by men, about men, and half of the humanity has been largely ignored or undervalued. And I discovered about a year and a half ago an extraordinary, brilliant writer by the name of Svetlana Alexievich, who explains that women remember the past very differently than men, and in a much more emotional way than men, and in a much more healing way than men. And so through her, being guided by her, I've tried to see the impact the women have made in history that have been underestimated, and it's time to rediscover their extraordinarily important roles.
Well, I guarantee you my wife remembers history a lot different than I do. Usually it's with the swat to the back of the head.
And remind you of it?
Did I not tell you to take the garbage out? Yeah, anyway, let's don't go there. But we are going to take a trip back in time to the First Lady of Montana, to
That's right.
An amazing woman who helped write history in our world.
That's right.
And you're going to take us on that journey.
Yeah, and it's actually a national journey too, because it takes her from Missoula, the night of her election, up to the Chamber of Congress, where the night in which she took her first vote, and which was an immensely consequential, very courageous vote. And we're going to take the journey at her side, step by step, from Missoula to her vote. I think it's a powerful story, and there's a lot there that can really inspire us and teach us about this moment in time in our country.
All right, we're going to get to that. Brown Bag Hostess, are you ready?
I'm ready.
The journey begins right after this time out. On the KBOW Party Line, Father Patrick Beretta taking us back with one of the great women in Montana history. Stay with us.
Southwest Montana Community Health Center offers appointments 7 days a week for community members who have symptoms of COVID. If you are experiencing symptoms such as fever, fatigue, shortness of breath, cough, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, muscle aches, or loss of taste or smell, you should be seen by a provider to determine the cause of your symptoms. Remember, COVID isn't the only virus in the community, and it will continue to be one of the many during the coming seasons. Call 723-4075 for more information or to schedule an appointment.
Crazy Carroll's Casino invites you to stop in to get your raffle tickets for the Silverbow Tavern Owners Association's first ever raffle. You can get your tickets at Crazy's or any member bar, casino, or restaurant for your chance to win one of 2 full hunting rifle setups that include a 300 Winchester Magnum rifle, Vortex scope, tripod, mounting rings, and black soft case valued at $2,400. So buy your tickets now. Giveaway to be held on September the 12th, and you need not be present to win. Crazy Carroll's Casino and Mill Bar on the corner of Walnut and Hayes in the shadows of the concentrator where there's Segrevious. Brothers Water Treatment and Pump Service knows the importance of fresh, clean water. If you're on city water or a private well and have noticed scale buildup in your sinks or baths or noticed watermarks on faucets, you have hard water. Consider an American-made Water-Right RC unit that pulls hardness and chlorine from your home's water. Easily reduce metals and minerals with a Water-Right air filtration system. With 40 years water experience, call Brothers Water Treatment and Pump Service 559-0261. Owned and operated by Wayne Brothers.
Hello, everybody. We're back. The KBOW Party Line. It's a pleasure to have you on board today. It's a brown bag lunch on the party line. And today we're getting the opportunity to have Father Patrick Beretta take us on a journey. Today's brown bag lunch. Kim along with us. And Father, with that, we'd like to turn it over to you for your presentation today on the KBOW Butte Archives Brown Bag Lunch.
Thank you, Ron, very much. From Montana to Washington, D.C., Jeannette Rankin's iconic adventure in conscience. During the winter of 1917, America was captivated by a young woman. People could not get enough of her. She was very intelligent, audacious, elegant, and she came from a small ranch outside of Missoula. In the night of November the 7th, 1916, it became clear that Montana had made history by electing Jeannette Rankin as the first woman member of Congress. In Montana, women had the right to vote since 1914. Rankin's election sent a shockwave throughout the country, and the multitude of crusaders in the women's suffrage movement widely celebrated this pivotal moment in their decades-long battle to obtain for women the right to vote. In February 1917, Jeannette Rankin embarked on a national speaking tour. It was an astonishing success. She gave lectures in New York, including an unforgettable evening at Carnegie Hall, in Chicago, widely throughout the Midwest and even the South. Every venue was filled to the brim. There was a voracious interest in her. Some came for the novelty. Some came because she was a major celebrity. Some were drawn by the history-making nature of her visit. and others had a genuine intellectual curiosity in discovering whether a woman could make a substantial difference on the national political landscape. One of the intriguing components of the articles that covered her speaking tour at that time was a preoccupation with what she was wearing. It was a subtle way to dismiss her. The male reporters who covered her male counterparts would never think of writing about the clothes of the male politician. Here's an example from the Philadelphia Evening Ledger. All in black, black coat and skirt. Miss Rankin wore a wide-brimmed black sailor hat, a white shirtwaist and a bunch of violets making the only touch of color. She looked singularly fresh and unruffled after 5 nights in a sleeping car. Another paper reported this: a stunning black satin and georgette crepe dress, trimmed with white, cut low enough to expose a gracefully rounded throat. You will not find articles describing the throat of male politicians. It was as if the most interesting thing you could write about a woman was how she dressed. Her brother Wellington was devoted to her. He attended Harvard Law School and later became Attorney General for Montana. He accompanied her, and he became, during the tour, her primary speechwriter. He had a strict warning to her: speak boldly, but avoid the topic of the war. It is too divisive and controversial. She scrupulously heeded the caution. Since August 1914, the world was at war. On the battlefields of France, Belgium, Russia, Austria, and Italy, an unprecedented, relentless slaughter of young men was taking place daily. It was a brutal war of attrition in which the generals had remained stunningly inept at adjusting tactics to match the immensely lethal capabilities of modern weapons of war. On the waters of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, war voraciously devoured merchant ships and civilian seamen. It was this indiscriminate submarine campaign of sinkings by the German Navy that made the U.S. uneasy neutrality increasingly challenged. The two most prominent voices on the war debate was Republican Robert La Follette of Wisconsin, a fierce and feisty opponent of the U.S. joining the war effort, and the bellicose former American President Theodore Roosevelt, who was an outspoken advocate of entering the war on the side of France and Britain. As part of her travels, Rankin visited Butte. Here, she experienced an enthusiastically warm welcome. She gave several passionate speeches and danced with Irish miners. But in the Butte of 1917, seething anger never ran too deep below the surface. The American West had remained a stronghold of anti-war sentiment. In Butte, that sentiment was accentuated by the intense Irish hostility towards Great Britain and a Union-inspired form of pacifism. In 1917, Butte was at the height of its political power. Rankin was very sympathetic to the Irish cause and paid close attention to labor voices. A member of the IWW addressed her publicly with these words. He said to her, "Dear comrade, we emphatically urge you to work and vote against the country entering the horrible European war. The working class of this country will necessarily have to do the fighting, and they have nothing to gain by shedding their blood and that of their brothers." Very strong currents of radical ideologies circulated in Butte at the time. They had been exported from Europe since the turn of the century and they found in the copper ore of the Butte Hills very fertile ground on which to grow. Some of the Italians favored a variety of anarchist ideas, and the Finns, on the other hand, spread revolutionary doctrines inspired by the Russian Bolsheviks. In Russia, in the month of March 1917, the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty collapsed in 3 days. On the 12th of that month, the army garrison of Petrograd joined the striking workers and socialist reformers, and at that moment, the fate of the Tsar was sealed. On March the 15th, Emperor Nicholas II abdicated, and the news of the abdication brought joy to numerous Butte socialist miners. Butte remained passionately opposed to the war, but the rest of the country was changing. March 1917 is an anomaly in U.S. history. In 4 short weeks, a majority of the public opinion went from supporting neutrality to supporting a declaration of war. Americans were deeply shocked and enraged at the unrestricted submarine warfare and the drowning of dozens of innocent American seamen. And then there was the infamous Zimmerman telegram scandal. German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmerman sent a telegram to the Mexican government offering an alliance in case the U.S. entered the war against Germany, with the objective of returning California, Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico to Mexico. It was intercepted by British intelligence, turned to U.S. intelligence, and the rest is history. With the rest of the country, the thinking of President Wilson, who had been just re-elected on a keeping out of the war platform, was also evolving. And at the end of March 1917, he asked to talk to a joint session of Congress about the war. Jeannette Rankin was about to make her momentous entrance on the national stage in a great drama of conscience. Do I continue? At noon, on April the 1st, 1917, Jeannette Rankin finally arrived in Washington, D.C. with her brother Wellington. At Union Station, she was mobbed by a crowd of reporters. Her first stop was to visit her new office at the Capitol. Her 2 secretaries, who had been at work for over a week, welcomed her to a bare room. Later that day, her mother Olive, who was a teacher in Missoula, arrived to witness her daughter's swearing-in ceremony. Later that evening, Jeannette, her mother, and the 2 secretaries moved into a small apartment. Early the next morning, Rankin took a cab to the Shoreham Hotel for an appearance that a group of suffragists had organized in her honor. When she walked in the banquet hall, she received a deafening ovation. People observed that she appeared nervous and intimidated. She finally rose to speak, briefly and with great humility. She concluded her remarks with the following words. "There will be many times," she said, "when I will make mistakes, and so I need your encouragement and support. I know I will not let you down. I promise. I promise." Now, when is the last time these days you heard a politician telling you that they will make a lot of mistakes? When the breakfast event in her honor ended, she went straight to Capitol Hill. Immediately she was brought to the rooms of James Beauchamp Clark from Missouri, the Speaker of the House, a Democrat. At exactly 5 minutes till noon, Clark himself escorted her to her seat on the Republican side of the chamber. At her appearance, the galleries erupted with loud cheering. 80-year-old Joe Cannon, an Illinois Republican, was the first to welcome her on the chamber floor. He said, "Miss Rankin, welcome. If you're looking for a grandfather, you might adopt me." And then began the long and tedious roll call. Roll calls in those days were notoriously boisterous, with members paying little attention to it, absorbed in conversation. But then the clerk came to calling the Montana, and then silence descended into the chamber. And when Miss Rankin finally responded, it triggered among all representatives one of the most moving, cheerful, and united eruption in American history. Rankin blushed, she then smiled, and finally she stood up and bowed deeply, first to the Republican side and then to the Democrat side. The first order of business was to elect the Speaker of the House. The candidate for which she voted was defeated, and Clark, the Democrat, was re-elected. President Wilson, who had requested to speak to a joint session of Congress, went golfing on April the 2nd, and not even his cabinet knew what to expect of his upcoming speech. At 8 p.m., as he was finishing dinner with his wife in the White House, he received word that Congress was now ready to hear him. At 8:15, Wilson, accompanied by his wife Edith and his personal physician, Dr. Grayson, left the White House. When the president arrived on Capitol Hill, a large crowd greeted him with patriotic songs. Finally, at 8:32, he entered the chamber. The first half of the speech was received with solemn silence. And then he spoke the words, "The world must be made safe for democracy. We desire no conquest, no dominion. We are the champions of the right of mankind." These words were greeted with vigorous applause. He then asked Congress to declare war on the German Empire. He concluded with the words, "It is a fearful thing to lead this great peaceful people into war, but right is more precious than peace." The address lasted 36 minutes and was greeted with wild cheers for almost everyone. When Wilson stepped down, he was shaking and very pale. He looked utterly exhausted. The Senate was first to take the war resolution, and only 6 senators, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, voted against it. On April the 5th, 1917, it was the turn of the House to debate it. The day before, Rankin had received a visit of Hazel Hunkins, a well-known suffrage activist from Billings. Rankin told Hunkins that the suffrage leaders were placing enormous pressure on her to vote for war. The reasoning was the following, that he would be very unfortunate for the first vote of the woman in Congress would be an unpopular vote and would ultimately weaken the suffragist cause. Even her brother Wellington, who was personally against the war, advised his sister strongly, just for pure political expediency, to vote in favor of it. The House debate dragged on until evening. At one point, Rankin left her seat and went to the gallery to consult with women's suffrage leaders. Finally, at 3 a.m. on April the 6th, the vote began. In the course of voting, the clerk called Rankin's name. She remained silent. He called her name again, and then all eyes turned towards her. To all observers, she appeared visibly under mental distress. She placed her hand on her throat. She touched her hair. She looked up towards the ceiling. She rubbed her eyes and cheeks very nervously. She clasped her hands. She was still silent. Finally, the kindly Joe Cannon, who had asked her a few days before to adopt him as a grandfather, walked towards her and gently said, "Miss Rankin, you represent the womanhood of this country. Just vote your conscience and all will be fine." Rankin still remained silent. The clerk once again called, "Miss Rankin," and then again, "Miss Rankin." Finally she stood up. She was unstable on her feet. She grabbed the back of her chair and said in a thin and trembling voice, "I want to stand by my country, but I cannot vote for the war." The clerk, finding it difficult to hide his impatience, said with mild exasperation, "Does that mean then that you intend to vote no?" She nodded and sank back into her chair. The whole chamber gasped loudly. In Butte, the news of Rankin's no vote was received with great satisfaction and pride. In the rest of the country, it was very, very unpopular. Even her suffragist allies turned against her, and Jeannette Rankin was terribly hurt. Carrie Chapman Catt, the brilliant chief strategist of the women movement, believed that women would eventually get the right to vote as a result of making very substantial contributions to the national war effort. Carrie Catt was right. It was precisely that contribution in Great Britain and the United States that ultimately changed the popular opinion of the men. Now, as a European, I am very grateful that U.S. joined the war. I visited a few years ago the cemeteries in eastern France where millions and millions of tombs cover hundreds and thousands of acres. Cemeteries with French troops, English troops, Irish troops, German troops. Every church in France has a side of wall covered with dozens and dozens of names of men who died during that war. And even in my high school in Paris, as I entered every day, I would be greeted by the engraved names on marble of dozens and dozens of schoolboys who had been killed by the war. The U.S. participation clearly shortened the war and saved many, many lives. On December 1918 in Paris, in probably the greatest military victory parade of all time, millions and millions of Parisians showered with gratitude and adulation President Wilson beaming inside a magnificent horse-drawn carriage. Before Jeannette Rankin, the no vote was the right vote. It was the vote of conscience. It was the vote that represented the majority of her constituents. Later she explained that during that period, of all the letters she received from Montana, 19-1 were against the war. In our age when conscience is devalued and party dominance and absolute party loyalty are considered supreme, the story of a young Montana woman reminds us of the values that truly make this country great. The freedom of conscience and the tolerance of dissent are the true mark of a great civilization. And that is why Jeannette Rankin's courageous and iconic adventure in conscience is a lesson of timeless inspiration.
That was wonderful.
Fascinating.
More. I want more. Come on. Give us some more here. Stop. Don't hold back anymore. Let's go. So there you have it. The journey of the young woman from Missoula, Montana to the nation's capital with the vote at the time was so negative, so controversial even. Yeah, good point.
Enormously controversial. And the courage that she had to follow her conscience in spite of the pressure of the people she held dearest, the suffragist sisters and her brother. And she says, no, I can't do it. And you can see in the agonizing length of time it took her to take that vote, the inner struggle that she went through. It's a powerful moment in American history, in my opinion.
And what great advice for Mr. Cannon.
Oh,
I mean, to set, vote your conscience. I mean, it actually set her free, if you think about it.
Liberated her entirely.
It allowed her to do what was, in her mind, the right thing to do.
Yeah, liberated her. Yeah, that was also an extraordinary moment of kindness on his part.
And if you stop and think as well, her statue stands in the nation's capital, and her notoriety, her legend, was written on that first vote.
That's right.
And the comment she made about that vote after the fact, because if you follow that up and go back and read any of the materials afterwards when she was interviewed, and she talked about mothers sending their children off to die and didn't want to be responsible for that.
That's right.
Something that I think was used by many others later on in different war scenarios. So beautiful.
Absolutely.
Well done.
Thank you.
We'll be back and discuss it more. We're going to put Kim in charge here when we come back, and we'll visit a little bit more. And again, if somebody wants to ask a question or make a comment, you can call in and join us here on the party line. As we'll be right back after this time out on the Brown Bag Lunch on the KBOW party line. Thanks for being with us today. And we're back at 1:43 on your Wednesday. It's Brown Bag Lunch Day here on the KBOW Party Line. And we've had a great presentation by Father Patrick Beretta about Jeannette Rankin. And we are going to move on now to discussion. And again, if you'd like to ask a question or if you'd like to share any on the thoughts, 494-7500 on the KBOW Party Line. But from here, I step aside, and Kim, our host from the archives, is going to take over with Father Patrick Beretta.
All right. Well, thank you. So I was kind of intrigued. I want to bring this kind of back to Butte a little bit, since that's where we are. You mentioned the anti-British feelings here in Butte, the pacifism that was promoted by labor. Was it because of Butte, really, that Jeannette Rankin was put in Congress? Was it the power? Was it Butte's political power that kind of pushed her?
Well, Butte was really behind her, and I think that she proved to be very sophisticated in using the Butte power. The women's suffrage movement cultivated Butte support right from the beginning. There was a sense here that because of this hunger for emancipation, that the Irish and some of the Irish nationalities here in Butte were here, that they would get great support for the right to vote in Butte, and they did. I mean, Butte was in favor, was really a trailblazer in the women's suffrage movement.
A trailblazer nationally or regionally, do you think? Did they lead the West, or did they lead the nation?
I think they led the West, but I think that...
Brown Bag Lunch.
Thank you. I think that Butte had national ambitions. Butte never considered just Butte. Butte considered itself, and for a large reason, because of the significance of its copper ore production, considered himself a national leader in many things. Certainly, the labor movement had a national power, and that's where the greatest source was here. But I think that its influence on the suffrage, the women's suffrage movement, is significant. I would love to spend more time studying it, but it received in Butte a very strong early supporter. And a lot of suffrage, even before the visit of Jeannette Rankin, a lot of other women from the East Coast came to visit Butte to seek the support. Irish women, not just Irish women, but Butte women had a particularly prominent role in this community anyway, even when they didn't have the vote. They were community leaders before they were community leaders in other parts of the country.
I think so. Do you think that is because there were so many women put in that place? Because maybe down to even the miners' wives, when you lose your husband, you've got to step up, right? So do you think it was that stepping up and having to go to work, having to support your family, forming a women's union? I think, wasn't it the first women's union in the nation here in Butte? Do you think that perhaps is why?
Yeah, I think that's a huge factor. If you look at the role of the wife of Manus Dugan, who was the great hero who died in the Speculator fire, she took a certain prominent role after that, and didn't have a choice. I mean, they had to make their family survive, and did it very courageously. I also gave credit to the Irish women of Butte, and I'll tell you why. I have studied in great detail how the Irish people recovered from the famine that was so utterly devastating, so cruel, so painful, so traumatic. And there's no doubt in my mind that it's the women in Ireland who had the resiliency to lift the country again. They kept that when they came here. And so they brought the sense that they were leaders within the home and leaders of the community. They were very respected. Irish women, I think, earlier on than other cultures, were highly respected, listened to, and I'm talking even about old Celtic history.
I was going to say, it
Yeah,
sounds like
yeah,
the old Celtic women.
Very. I mean,
Yes.
a third. It was a matriarchy. I mean, in many phases of Celtic history.
Do you think part of this, you talk about the Irish, the idea that when the Irish came to the United States, many of them came here in servitude. I mean, really, when you think about the first slaves in the United States, a lot of them were the Irishmen who were brought here because they had to leave. They had no
Indented
food.
servants.
And they came here and they were treated. We talked about
Horrendously.
the way they were treated in Boston, the way they were treated everywhere. So when they came here, I always felt that Butte was more open to race, to women's equal rights and things of that nature because they all knew what it was like to be put down because they were Irish.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. I mean, Butte was very, very tolerant, a very, very good history of rapport with the Native American community. There's no equivalent in other parts of the state. It came much, much later. So I agree with you completely. One of the things, I don't know if there was an incident on the campus of Montana Tech some time ago where somebody wrote in paint white privilege under Marcus Daly. If there is a kid who doesn't come from privilege, is Marcus Daly.
Yeah.
He grew up during the Irish famine. I saw where he was born, it's a barn on the side of the road. Marcus Daly grew up in extraordinarily cruel levels of poverty. And when you grew up with that poverty in your mind, you do everything you can for the rest of your life not to fall back into it. That was the driving force of the success of Marcus Daly, not privilege, so.
Well, and you go to the other side of that. Charlie Pride, an interview that we did with him here on this radio many years ago, talked about the only place he felt equal and where he belonged was in Butte. And he'd come from East Helena to Butte to perform and to hang out because he was equal to everybody. And it's the only place where he felt where he was equal to everyone else was in Butte, Montana. So that mentality, that Irish mentality that we've been there, we've been put down, we're rising back up, and we're not going to put anybody else down.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And about women, you can see that women physicians, for instance, in Butte, were highly respected. At the time when there was a certain amount of suspicion about what is a woman doing being a physician, they had great practices here, very successful.
Even business women in Butte were prominent members of the community.
That's right.
So can we look forward to a future talk about Caroline McGill, maybe?
Yes.
Yay.
That would be a goal of me. Caroline McGill, Dr. McGill, is a hero of mine, and there is a marvelous story to say because it captures Butte. It captures the role of women in Butte. Extraordinary destiny, this lady.
One thing that occurs to me is that, there's the tale of Western movement, and you have the raucous camps that erupted all over the West, the gold camps and all of them, the ore camps. And women brought their civilizing force. They built the schools, and they built the churches, and they built the communities. And it strikes me that that the history we learned about the great white men of history, that their ideal of civilization is much different than the women's ideal of civilization, which again focused on the family and the children and the schools and the building of the community and looking outward to make things better for everybody.
Whereas the guys were driven by greed, and there was a lot of drinking and entertainment and fighting, the way a bunch of guys behave when their mothers are not
mother
around.
Is out.
My mother's listening. Don't give it away.
I want to say something about the admiration that I have for Rankin is her commitment to conscience. People have said to me before, you don't make it clear enough whether you think she was right or she was wrong. Respecting conscience doesn't mean you agree with the vote. Respecting conscience is that you agree, you respect the power of her conscience, you admire it, and even if you may not agree exactly with her vote. I would have voted for the war because of my European background, and I think that actually the World War I was actually good for Ireland because it detached Ireland from Great Britain and started attaching a little more to the continent, which is now it is. With Brexit, it's now complete, but it started with World War I. But I think that we need to recapture in our culture and in our political climate the importance, the sacredness of conscience. And as long as a decision of conscience is not immoral, I think we have a duty to respect it, whether we agreed with it or not. And we cannot, be intolerant to dissent just because, supreme loyalty is what matters. Now, that's not the sign. That's the sign of a civilization in decline, not the sign of a thriving civilization.
Amen to that. And when you start becoming destructive and everything is a battle and everything is a fight, your republic has no chance to stand.
Precisely.
What it does is it prevents an educated electorate because they're just going to listen to the talking heads, which is what satellite news has become. I mean,
that's right.
For both sides.
That's
and
right.
they're not listening to the people
right.
who elected them, which also struck me that she was listening
That's right.
to the people that she represented.
19 to 1.
19 to 1. And that Montana was not in favor of the war. And so
Period.
Not only did she vote her conscience, but she voted Montana's conscience.
Yeah, I think you're right.
She wasn't beholden to anybody
Wouldn't that be
else,
refreshing?
to PACs or anything. Yeah.
Beholden to the president
To the
or people in her party or the suffrage movement,
Right.
her sisters.
Right.
So no, there's something that's also very important,
So
Kim.
much
That
courage.
she said, I was elected to represent them, and I'm going to do it, whether it hurts or not.
And
it hurt
continued
big
to
time.
do it through her whole career.
And it continued to hurt big time, but she did it. You know,
Yes.
And took a lot of heat over it, but earned respect as well.
that's right.
Anything, Father, in your research that stood up as that was a bad thing that happened to her? Were there some things that you found in your research?
Well, I think that the World War II vote, because the World War II was widely perceived as a great moral crusade, hurt her reputation a little bit, and then she was seen as in her campaign against the Vietnam War, she was seen as more political. But I think she was always highly respected for her honesty, for her courage. And what hurt her the most in my reading was her suffrage sisters turning against her. I mean, that caught deeply into the consciousness of Jeannette Rankin. That hurt because those were the women that she was fighting on their behalf. She represented them, so. I want to give tribute to two books before it's over. It's called, because most of what I said today, besides some articles, came from them. One is Elaine Weiss, The Great Famine to Win the Vote, The Woman's Hour, outstanding book. And the other one is a book on the most consequential month in 20th century history, On the Brink of War and Revolution, March 1917, from Will, England. America joined the war, and the Tsar abdicated in 1 month. And that's extraordinary, in my opinion. It captured the intensity of the entire century was captured in that month. And so I want to give credit to these two books.
Well, thank you for coming in and enlightening us. And Kim, thank you for bringing the brown bag lunch down to the KBOW party line.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you here. It's a
And
great
thanks
show.
Thank you. Thank you to your listeners, and thank you to you and Kim. I love the Butte Archives. I'm a big admirer.
We love it
Amen
when
to
Paula
that.
comes by.
Well-
Should we? Can I give a plug for the next one?
Well, you know what? We're out of time.
Ah,
So I'll have to
we're
do
gonna
that
talk about
tomorrow.
genealogy.
Ooh, that'll be
I
fun.
got it
Look
in.
forward to that one.